We're looking at the teaching of the greatest teacher of all time, aren't we? The Lord Jesus Christ. And I want you just to think a moment about that reading we just had. We've only got 3 nights on this subject, and chapter 25 is going to take 2 of them. So what we have to do is, in chapter 24, try and cover that this evening. Ellie's getting worried already about the time that might take. Now, let's get it very clear as to how we approach it. There are 2 distinct themes in here. 2 distinct themes. If you get this in your mind, it'll be easier to transmit this passage into reality. His last message to those of his own time, 1. He's very concerned about the people he's been talking to all the time. This is his last opportunity for them, because after this, he's going to go to crucifixion. And then the concentrated teaching for all the responsible to know about his future day of judgment for them. Okay, but there's 2 things there. The last opportunity to the message of those of his own day, and he's going to expend a lot of energy doing that, and concentrated teaching for all the responsible in any age to know about his future day of judgment for them. So it's all going to be about the judgment seat. Now, if you have a look at Luke 21, and you've got the pages I've given you this evening, I've written out the basic comparisons from one chapter to another, from Matthew 24 across to Mark and across to Luke. You find in Luke that it's not always following the same pattern as the other 2, but you find different sections where he deals with the same subject. Now, what we need to understand is Luke 21, at the end of Luke's dealing with the subject, this is what he says, and it's right at the end, and it's an interesting comment. In Luke 21 and verse 37 and 38, and what he says is, "And in the daytime he was teaching in the temple, and at night he went out and abode in the mount that is called the Mount of Olives. And all the people came early in the morning to hear him in the temple for to hear him." Now, we don't exactly know the number of days. Jesus didn't go back to Bethany, which was quite a trip away from Jerusalem. He abode in the mount. Now, why would he have done that? Because he didn't want to lose any time whatever to get this message across to the people. Clearly, that would be the reason. So we're looking at him in these last days, concentrating his teaching, and early in the morning the people came to hear. Early in the morning. They were hungering and thirsting for the teaching that the Lord was giving. So we've got Jesus' tireless attempts to convince his hearers of the realities to come. Now, there were dreadful realities going to come on that city. And he was tirelessly expending his energies to tell them what's going to happen. And that they therefore had to, particularly in their generation, prepare for that day. And it was going to be a terrible time for them. Now, there's 3 classes of people that he is talking to. There are 3 classes. The absolute enemies of Jesus, comprised of the scribes, the Pharisees and the rulers. That's one class particularly. The second class are some Pharisees and others that are quite confused about him and where he fits, and some of them later believed after his resurrection. And then the third class is the absolute believers expecting his kingdom soon. No one's expecting him to go away. No one's expecting him to be crucified and then to come back again 2,000 years later. They're all expecting the kingdom to come shortly. Now, we need that context, because when we deal with the things that are said in here in the light of that, we have to be able to understand where it fits. It's easy to misapply these scriptures. You know, over the years, brothers and sisters, I look back and I think about things that I've said about these chapters, and I used to always say double meanings. There's double meanings in here. No, I don't there's double meanings. There isn't really double meanings. That really is an expression by someone who hasn't contemplated it properly, I think, including me. There are certain things that we have to do. You know, it's really good to see young people here this evening, and these young people are just beginning a life which we trust will take in the truth and expand, and they're living in families where the Bible is read and their minds are being prepared, and their minds are like a sponge. They're taking in the water, or like a blotting paper, but they wouldn't know what a blotting paper was, so no good talking about that. So they just absorb facts, don't they? And they're building up facts, and we do the same. And Bible facts are extremely important. So everything you do with the readings with your young people is great. It's putting facts in their head. And I'm sure that if you were brought up in the truth, you would know you never doubted that God existed. You never doubted that the kingdom was going to come on earth. You never doubted that we didn't have an immortal soul. That was all childhood stuff that was inserted into the mind. And that is so vital and so valuable. But then we go through the maturing stage, maturing adults. And Bible facts still, but with exhortation lessons where the principles are now going to be talked about. And you know, for young speakers, there's always a danger because speaking can be a little bit competitive, so to speak, amongst young speakers. You've got your peers that are doing similar things, and maybe you're comparing what he says to what I do. And this sort of, I'm not talking out of place here. I know that happens. That's reality. So there is a tendency sometimes to sensationalise the scripture. That might be for popularity or whatever you want. There's a tendency to find something no one said before. There's a motive behind there, but it's a sort of almost camouflage motive when you're going through the stage. You don't think about the motive. And maybe teaching for self-adulation. You want people to tell you that was a good talk afterwards. You know, it's the worst thing people could actually say to a speaker. He prays that what he does will be right before God, and afterwards someone says that and actually takes his mind right away in the wrong direction altogether. It's just not where we need to be. But you can never do better than explain what the scripture actually says. That I think is what we have to come to in the truth. You can never do better than say what it actually says, not to embellish it beyond its limits. Embellish it as it contains itself within the narrative. You're safe ground. The Bible's own message is the best message. It's God's message. Jesus' message is Jesus' message. So when we talk about maturity in teaching and understanding, it's always context. Now, when people sell houses, they say it's location. It sets the value of that. But in the Bible, context. Always get context. And then you've got a chapter like this, context important. You know, there's only 3 classes in the world, just 3 classes in the world. People who don't know God, people who know and end up being rejecting, and people who know and pray for forgiveness. They're the only 3 classes. That no one goes to the kingdom and hadn't prayed for forgiveness. You know, that becomes the potency. Like when Jesus gave the parable in Luke 18 of the men that went down in prayer. It's not just a story about the difference of what people do, is it? In Luke 18 and 9 to 13, just look what he says. This is our life, brothers and sisters. This is where we all stand. In Luke 18 verse 9, and he spoke this parable to certain that trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others. Now, that's a problem of self-righteousness, isn't it? The despising of others. Now, this is not just a lesson for us to observe about what other people do, is it? This is us. We have to be here. Now 2 men went up the temple, one Pharisee and the other a publican. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, God, I thank you that I'm not like other men. Now we do a little similar in this sense, that we thank God that he's given to us the knowledge of his truth. But we're still like other men, brothers and sisters. We're still like other men. We still have weaknesses like they do. But we might not have the extent of them, perhaps. But they're very much real. Extortioners, unjust, adulterers, even as this publican. Now, as this publican, because the superior frowned on him. I fast twice in the week, I give tithes of all I possess. We can think, we come to the meetings, we reread the Bible. And the publican standing afar off would not so much as lift his eyes to heaven. The humility is what is required. We have to be him in verse 13. That's who we have to be. We can't be the others. He would not so much as lift his eyes to heaven, smote upon his breast and said, God be merciful to me, a sinner. And that is where we stand, brothers and sisters. That's the only place we stand. There is no one goes in the kingdom without that forgiveness, without the mercy of God. No one at all. So in anything we study, that becomes the paramount thing for us. Now when we look at these chapters, I've given you these pages, and I sat in a meeting on Sunday and I'd been writing out these comparisons of the Matthew, Mark and Luke for the different topics as dealt with in Matthew 24 and down. And it suddenly dawned on me, I thought I'll give out these as handouts, and it dawned on me that we're also going to have to send this onto the screen for others that are listening. So Angus helped me to break down this and put them up onto the screen for us. So we'll come to that now. So what he's done is broken them in sections, but you've got them here on a paper, and I thought it's better if you've got them there. You can make notes and whatever you want to do with them. Now, just briefly, we want to get towards the end of Matthew 24, so we have to keep our eye on the time. But if briefly we look down, the headings are, the temple is going to be destroyed. Now just look at what he says. In verse 1 of Matthew 24, Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him to show him the buildings of the temple. Now they came to him to show him the buildings. Now, what's in their mind? They think they're beautiful, brothers and sisters. They think they're fantastic building. And there's a pride here, isn't there? There's a sense of pride about that. Look at those buildings. They're telling Jesus to look at those buildings. And he said to them, do you not see these things? Truly I say to you, there won't be one stone left here upon another that shall not be thrown down. Now, what he's saying is that's all going to disappear. You know, I was with a brother once that we were actually in Israel, and we were looking at the base stones of the temple. You get down there by the Wailing Wall and going into the tunnel and looking at those stones. And the comment was actually made to me, well, that prophecy's not fully fulfilled yet because look at those stones, they're still there, they've got to be turned over. So the earthquake, when it comes, when Jesus returns, will finish that off. I don't think so, brothers and sisters. I mean, this is where context is important. What he's saying here is that whole system is just going to be destroyed. There won't be anything holding together at all. It's going. Now that would have been a profound shock to the disciples. Look at that wonderful edifice. Not one stone upon another. And when he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately and saying that they really bother about that, really concerned. Like, tell us, when will that happen? You see, if it's not going to be one stone left upon another, this whole thing's going to be destroyed. When? Now it adds here, and what will be the sign of your coming? Now they did not believe that he was ever going to go. So what are they talking about with the sign of the coming? Now you see, when you go a comparison across, if you can take these pages home and at home sit down and look at each section of them and just the slight differences between them, what you find is the others say, when will it be that these stones will be thrown down? What will be the end of the age? It's only Matthew that adds a sign of your coming. Now, did they mean when you come as king? They certainly didn't mean when you go away and come back from heaven, back to earth to become king 2,000 years later. They didn't mean that. So whatever they meant by that in the fullness of it, I think probably when will you come as king and the end of the age, the end of the age. Now they interpreted the destruction of that temple must mean an end of an age. And probably because they knew what Jesus had been teaching about a kingdom to come in which there would be a temple of the future age. Now, we don't know fully, do we? But what we do know is that Jesus said to them, take heed that no man deceive you. Take heed that no... Now, he's concerned about them. They don't realise the calamity that's going to come upon them when he's taken away. They don't understand that. Let no man deceive you. They wouldn't think they could ever be deceived from following Christ. But he knows it's going to be different to that, brothers and sisters. And it's a lesson for us there that take heed that no man deceive you is appropriate to us in a sense, as in any age. But he says, many will come in my name saying I am Christ and will deceive many. And you'll hear of wars and rumours of wars. But be not troubled, for all these things will come to pass. But the end isn't yet. So between his going and the destruction of the temple, these things were going to happen. Nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom, famines, pestilences, earthquakes in diverse places. These are the beginnings of the birth pangs. That's what the sorrows here means. The labour of a woman for birth. These are the beginning of the birth pain. But the birth, brothers and sisters, in this case surely is the destruction of the Jewish system and economy, the temple and all it stood for. That's the birth that was coming. It was a birth of destruction for them in that. And then they will deliver you up to be afflicted and kill you. And you'll be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And many of you shall be offended and betray one another and hate one another. It was going to be a terrible time for them, brothers and sisters. But it was, we're talking from 33 to 70, 37 years later. You know, when things are said on a day, 37 years later, things are very much different, aren't they? Think about our own lives and things that happened some time back. How much different is it now? And it's the same for them. And as things came on changing point by point, these words had to be remembered. There will be many false prophets arise and will deceive many. And because iniquity shall abound and love of many shall wax cold. Now this is surely going to affect the brotherhood because it's his believers that were going to wax cold and lose their love of the truth. But he that will endure to the end will be saved. Now, what's salvation for him? Is it just salvation from missing out on the destruction of the Romans in AD 70? It's got to be more than that, doesn't it? Some of these people would have died before that happened, before that event. Others will have lived through it. The gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world, unto all nations. That's the Acts of the Apostles, isn't it? And then the end will come. An end will come. But the end will become and signified when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place. The abomination of desolation, it's the abomination in the Old Testament scripture was the idolatry of Deuteronomy 29, 17 and 18. And the desolation was the punishment for apostasy in Leviticus 26. So that what you've actually got, when the Romans set up their idol and worshipped it on the Temple Mount, that's the abomination of desolation. Whoso readeth, let him understand. But if you're in Judea, now this is a special message for those that were going to be alive at that point. If you're in Judea, flee to the mountains. Let him on the housetop not come down. Don't take any concern for your belongings in the city. Take no concern for them at all. Don't let them govern your direction as to what you do at that point of time. If you have opportunity to get out before the Roman legions come in and take it. And as Josephus says, there was probably about a 6-month period where they could have done that. It wasn't like instant overnight, but he dramatises it by saying, if you're in the field, don't go back to the city. And woe to them that are with child in those days and give suck. Pray that your flight not be in the winter or on a Sabbath day, for it will be great tribulation such as was not since the beginning of the world. That's the destruction of Jerusalem, brothers and sisters, was terrible, and the destruction of the Jewish economy. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake it will be shortened. So for the believers, God was working to save a remnant. And that's what Jesus is teaching them, isn't it? So if someone say to you after that event, lo, here is Christ, don't believe it. There's going to be false Christs that will come in my name and show great signs even. If it were possible, they should deceive the very elect. I've told you before, wherefore, if they shall say to you, he's in the desert, do not go there. Or he's in the secret chambers, don't believe it. As the lightning cometh out of the east and shines to the west, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. You know, we used to say, well, this is something symbolic about the east and the west here, that the east represented the way in which the Romans came across to do the destruction and went through the west. No, brothers and sisters, he's just saying this, isn't he? You cannot see anything else but the lightning when it happens. It is absolutely known that I'm going to be here when it is. You don't have to worry about whether I'm here. It will be as plain as the lightning shines over the sky and completely engulfs it in light. And wheresoever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. Now, that's an interesting little statement, because in Luke 17, Luke tells us that it was actually in answer to a question. And I want you to look at it for a moment, because it just shows how to decipher some of these scriptures and how careful we need to be. But in Luke 17, he talks about, and Luke adds actually what is not added in Matthew. Matthew talks about the days of Noah, and then Luke adds the days of Lot. Now, he says in verse 28, you can get the connection. In verse 27, they did eat, they drank, they married wives until the day that Noah entered the ark. That's the same in Matthew in verse 38 of chapter 24. Now, Luke's out of context, but he's still got the same detail in here. Now, what Luke says, likewise, as it was in the days of Lot. They did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. Now, when we talk about Lot, we do have to be careful. I remember when I was younger and we did studies about Abraham and Lot, we used to deride Lot somewhat because of his selection of things. And we'd say, well, Lot chose the easy path by going down to... If you were there, brothers and sisters, what were you done? If you were there with Abraham and Abraham said, you select where you want to go, you tell me what you would have done. Would you have gone to the rough mountain heights? Or would you have gone down to the plain? Now, does that make Lot a sin? You and I do that every day. We do that every day, brothers and sisters. We want to buy something for the house. What do you buy? You go along there, oh, that one's $500 more, but look at it. That's valuable. That's the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. In our time, We like to have the best of things if we can get it. That's just normal. But you see, what it says about Lot is this. They drank, they planted, they builded, but the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone. God would not rain fire and brimstone on Sodom until Lot was out. That's Lot. And when you go to 2 Peter, and he says that righteous man vexed his soul every day. Let's not deride him too much. Every day. Do you do that? We live in a world like his. Every day? Is our soul vexed because of what we see? That's what it will be like in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. In that day, he that's on the housetop, so he's back in the same detail as Matthew was when he recorded this, and he that's in the field. But then he adds, remember Lot's wife. Now you see, what he's saying in verse 29 is, the city got judged when Lot went out. The only reason for saving that city was Lot. The flood came when Noah entered the ark. The only reason for stopping the rain was Noah. Now, this is the context. We often apply that context, and I've been guilty of this in many lectures in the past, of talking about that for the world. This is not the world, brothers and sisters. Now, if you were in the days of Noah, I think the estimate was there would probably be about 3 million people on the earth, a little bit different to now. You know, Noah preached for 120 years. No one was not responsible, apart from the children. They were responsible. They knew what Noah was saying. 120 years they've been listening to him. They see this great edifice that he's building, this incredible ship. They all had opportunity. But when Noah entered the ark and God shut the door, the rain came. And you see, he's applying this to the judgment seat. He says of Lot, the city of Sodom, were responsible because Lot was in it. What was Lot doing? They set him in the gate, brothers and sisters, as judge because he's the only person that they could trust. They knew he was a righteous man. They put him there, and to deal with their unrighteous dealings with one another, they went to the gate to have him give the answer. But they were all responsible because of that. They knew what was right and wrong. And that's what it will be like when the Son of Man has come in that day. And he says, remember Lot's wife. So he applies it firstly to AD 70. If you get out as Jesus said, you will be demonstrating your trust in his word. If you don't, you lack faith and you'll die in the city. And remember Lot's wife, she actually got out of the city, but she went down with the judgment on it. She went out of the city, but went down with the judgment. You know, when Lot actually abided in Sodom, I wonder how much his wife had to do with the influence of him to go into Sodom. You know, we don't know any of that, do we? But we do know this, and we should never forget it. And if this could be said of you or me, that this man vexed his righteous soul every day. Every day. Now, he says in verse 34, I tell you in that night there'll be 2 men in one bed, the one taken and the other left, 2 women grinding together, one taken, the other left, 2 men in the field, one taken, the other left. Now, whatever we want to apply to that, in the judgment on Noah, the flood came and took them all away, Matthew says, in recording Jesus' words. The flood took them all away. So the ones that were taken may be the ones that were taken in judgment and destroyed. However, it doesn't really matter too much because what we do know is this, that someone is going to be alive and someone's going to be dead of those 2 people. I don't think he's talking about the angel coming and taking us to the judgment seat. He's not talking about that, brothers and sisters. He's talking about the consequence of the judgment itself. That one will remain and the other will go. This is the sense of the judgment. And you know, the disciples listened to what he said, and it appears that they take the word taken in the context of taken away somewhere, because they ask the question, where, Lord? And you know, in the Brotherhood over the years, people have said, when they talk about the judgment, they put a lot of stress on saying that the judgment has got to be located somewhere, and they come up with maybe Sinai, because we read in Isaiah about Christ coming in that day from this area of the east. And, you know, honestly, that surely is not the context. They say, where, Lord? You know, the least important thing about the judgment seat is where it will be. You know, there's no place on earth, I think, that you could conveniently just hold it in an ordinary sense. Do you have to have a place? I mean, if Zechariah's visions, the angels came to Zechariah, they exported him in a vision, and he actually was dealing with people that he knew in that vision as if they were there, and they weren't there at all. In the judgment, brethren and sisters, with immortality, cannot Christ, with his immortal power of God, be dealing with all of us at one time, instantly? Of course he can. God does it every day. And Jesus will be the same. The place is not important, but the circumstance is. And when Jesus said to them, wherever the body is, that's where the eagles will be gathered together. So where the carcass is, that's where the eagles will be. Now, if you were the disciples and you said to him, where, Lord, will this judgment be held? And his answer was, well, where the carcass is, that's where it'll be. Is that an answer? Is that an answer? Would that satisfy you as an answer? You see, you might as well have said, it's of no significance, because the normal course of things is, if you've got a carcass, the carrion birds will come to the carcass. You don't have to worry about where it is. It doesn't matter. But what does matter is being ready for it. Now, when we go back to Matthew 24, and we look at what Matthew now does, he brings us down to verse 43, where we just looked at Luke and what he did with that. And in verse 43 he says, know this, if the good man had known in what time the thief would have come, he would have watched, and he would not have suffered his house to be broken up. Therefore be ready, for in such an hour as you think not, the Son of Man comes. In such an hour as you think not. You know, when Christ comes is not important in that sense. It's what our condition is when he comes. Now, what is his coming, and when is his coming going to be? You know, there is only going to be one group of people alive when Jesus returns. And they're going to be quite unique, aren't they? Because these are people that could be living their life and actually will never, ever really actually physically die, because they'll be changed together with all the resurrected ones. That's a unique class, but it's just a little thumbnail of them, isn't it? The great mass, brethren and sisters, all come into this in verse 44. When the Apocalypse speaks about those at the resurrection, it's countless thousands upon thousands of them, millions. And all of them need to be ready for that coming, which is the resurrection. The point of their death is his coming. There's no time for Abram from the day he died till today. He knows nothing about all that time. When he comes out with us, there's no gap in between. It's the same day for him. That's the circumstances of the judgment seat, isn't it? But being ready applies then to everyone in the time of their probation. And the danger is that if we think not that his coming is important or is real or will appear, then we have a problem. Now, what is the thinking not? He talks about a wise servant whom the Lord has made ruler over his household to give them meat in due season. And he says, blessed is that servant. I didn't actually put these down further back. Now, when we talk here about the coming of a thief, I'm going to just deal with this very, very briefly because our time will go. When he says, if the good man of the house had known in what watch the thief would come, he would have watched and he would not have suffered his house to be broken up. I mean, that's so obvious, isn't it? But no one knows when the thief comes, do they? No one knows. No one knows that at all. Now, behold, as I come as a thief, what is the figure? You know, it's always used of the Lord's servants. Jesus never comes as a thief to the world, brother and sister. You see, the coming of a thief is not the fact that he comes, it's the fact of what he takes away. That's what the thief is about. It's what he removes. When he comes as a thief, he takes away the most precious thing that a person has, the most precious belongings, which is our life, brother and sister. And if we're rejected in the judgment, he will be the thief that takes away everything we ever had. You know, it just means we might just as well have never lived. Like, when you think about it, to be rejected at the judgment actually means we might just as well have never, ever lived. Because there's nothing else. It all goes, it disappears, it's all vanished in a second. We might just as well have never been here. What was the point of living then? You know, there's only one point of living, and that is for the kingdom itself, isn't it? There's no other point in it. Now, you see, what he actually says then, in Matthew 24, you don't know how he will come, and it will break up his house and take away his goods. In Sardis, in Revelation 3, he says, I will come to you as a thief. Again, it's a brotherhood, isn't it? And they needed to watch. So we're back in the Olivet prophecy. In Revelation 16, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watches and keeps his garments. Now, when we go to Thessalonians, the Apostle Paul actually has this in mind, doesn't he? Now, you've got a sheet there on Thessalonians. And it's very important, I think, to understand the context here of Thessalonians. In 1 Thessalonians 4, now we use this, and rightly so, at funerals because it's extremely appropriate for us. And we can use it in a way that Paul didn't. You see, when Paul says in verse 13, that I would not have you ignorant, brethren, concerning them which are asleep, that you sorrow not, even as others which have no hope. Now, he's talking about the ecclesia in Thessalonica, where many young brethren and sisters had been baptised, young in the sense of their baptismal birth, not in the sense of their age, but they've just come into the truth. And they came in on a great tyranny that was happening there. And some were losing their lives. And the other brothers and sisters in the ecclesia were sorrowing over their loss. But what they were sorrowing about was that these people had just been baptised. Now they're dead. They haven't had a chance to develop their spiritual development. How will they stand in the day of the judgment? That's their concern. If you go back and read the early parts of the narrative in Thessalonians, you'll see that he was concerned very much with the persecution that was coming. Now, what he says to them is this: if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, those which sleep in Jesus God will bring with him. So those infant brothers and sisters that were baptised that may have already died, they belong to Christ. They're baptised into him. And he will bring them. When he comes, he'll bring them. Now, we say this to you by the word of the Lord. Now, the word of the Lord here is not the word of God, it's the word of Jesus, and it's the Olivet prophecy. Because everything he deals with here, and you can go down the list there on the page, we might have trouble getting through it. But just briefly then, let's cover what it says. When he says we which are alive remain, he means the brothers and sisters of that day which are alive and remain. We will not go before them that have already died, that are already asleep. Because the Lord will come and in one instant he will raise the dead and bring us all together as one. And the trump of God with the archangel, the voice of the archangel, that's the Olivet prophecy. We which are alive and remain to be caught up together with them will be with the kingdom forever with the Lord. Comfort one another with these words. And then he says in verse 1, but of the times and seasons, brethren, you have no need I write to you. Now, we spend a lot of time talking about times and seasons, but and not wrongly. It's an influence on us that things are bad and we ought to keep our lives in tune with the things of the truth and look at what's happening in the world and how prophecy is being fulfilled. That's fine. But it's not what Paul's talking about here. Of the times and seasons, you've got no need I write to you. I've already talked to you about that. Now, he would have talked about times and seasons of his particular day, different to ours. But you yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord comes as a thief in the night. That's the Olivet prophecy. That's Jesus' words. So here he is dealing with the thief in the night. And when they will say peace and safety. Now, many times brethren have stood up, and myself in the past, and said there's going to be a peace and safety cry and attached it somehow to Ezekiel 38 that Israel will dwell confidently in the land, and maybe that's the appropriation of it. I think that's completely out of context, brothers and sisters, not appropriate at all. The cry of peace and safety here in the Olivet prophecy is the man who's given the service to look after his household while Christ is away, eats and drinks with the drunken, and he doesn't expect his Lord to come. He's saying, I'm okay, I don't have to worry, I can live my life like this. But the Lord will come and cut him in two. That's what Jesus says. And that's what Paul's saying here. Because when he says in verse 3, when they say peace and safety, sudden destruction comes on them. That expression, sudden destruction, occurs only once in another place, just once, in Luke 21 and verse 34. Just one place out of the Olivet prophecy. No other place in the Bible, just one place. So it refers to the Olivet prophecy, doesn't it? Luke 21, 34. Now what do you say in Luke 21? We're reading it. Luke 21 and verse 34. Take heed to yourselves. Now this is a lesson of, if we would have watched, the thief would not have taken us away. Take heed to yourselves, lest at any time your hearts be overcharged with surfeiting and drunkenness and cares of this life, so that day take you unawares. That word unawares is the same word as sudden destruction in 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 3. So watch therefore and pray always that you may be accounted worthy to escape these things that come to pass and to stand, accepted of course, before the Son of Man, not sleeping. You see, when we go back to Matthew 24, and we'll have to finish there this evening, in Matthew 24, what we find is the expressions that Paul's referring to and which Luke is translating in Luke 21, which we've just looked at. In verse 45, he said, who then is a faithful and wise servant? And next time we'll start looking at those, the faithful and wise servants, the two parables in Matthew 25. Who then is a faithful and wise servant whom his Lord has made ruler over his household to give them meat in due season? That blessed is that servant whom his Lord, when he comes, shall find doing. Verily I say unto you, he'll make him ruler over all his goods. Now these things come out, don't they, in the next two parables? Because in the next two parables we get the talents, and he makes him ruler over many things. So it's a connection of the idea from here. So what Jesus is doing is laying a foundation for those two parables. But if that evil servant shall say in his heart, my Lord delays his coming. That's the peace and safety cry. I'm okay, I'm safe, no worry. I can keep doing what I'm doing, no problem. And he begins to smite fellow servants, so his attitudes are wrong. And he eats and drinks with the drunken. He lives a life of embellishment for himself. The Lord of that servant will come in a day when he does not look for him, in an unexpected time for him, in an hour he is not aware of, and appoint him his portion with hypocrites. Cut him in two, and there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. You know, Jesus never uses that last expression, weeping and gnashing of teeth, in any other place other than the rejected at the judgment seat. It's always there, every time. Can you imagine, brothers and sisters, being rejected at the judgment seat? Just imagine. Your life has suddenly come to an end like the thief that comes, and suddenly we're there. But we're rejected. Who do we blame? Who do we blame for rejection? Now, what Jesus says is there'll be extreme weeping for the person and gnashing of teeth. You know, when you can't blame anyone else and you know that it's your own stupidity that did anything, I mean, you've done things in your life probably where you think like this and realise this, you gnash your teeth. Why do I do that? It's just the natural feeling for your own stupidity. Why did I do that? Now that's rejection at the judgment seat. You know, what's impressive about these last words of Jesus, brothers and sisters, that he gave to that generation, the people he's talking to, the same message for them. We here tonight, the same message for us. Hasn't changed, nothing changes. What's impressive about it is he puts it absolutely clear to us, don't be in that position where there has to be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Or depart from me, I never knew you. And we're going to get that in the next parables that come. So that's as far as we can go this evening, brothers and sisters. I hope the pages you've got will help to do those things. I didn't put this up on the screen for some that are streaming, but maybe they can look at that later.